A very warm welcome to all those classical musicians out there who want to grow and expand a creative lifestyle both on and off stage. My name is Karin Bonelli. I'm flutist at the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, a passionate explorer and seeker in musical and personal growth, and founder of Penthesilea Academy, the most innovative masterclass designed for audition preparation. This podcast is for you if you're searching for new ideas to elevate the productivity of your musical practice and your level of focus and expression on stage. But that's not all. In each episode, you will find bits and pieces to integrate into your everyday life, as well as new perspectives and insights by our experienced and passionate team and guests. Music is not a job. It is a way of living. My name is Karin Bonelli, and this is Penthesilea on Air. Welcome to another episode of Penthesilea on Air podcast. Dr. Eckart Altenmüller is a renowned neurologist, musician, and researcher specializing in the neurophysiology of music and musicians. He studied medicine at the University of Tübingen and classical flute with Aurel Nicolet at the Musikhochschule Freiburg, later earning his doctorate in medicine and specializing in neurology. From 1994 until 2025, he was the director of the Institute for Music Physiology and Musicians Medicine at the Hannover University of Music, Drama and Media. His research explores the neurobiology of emotions, movement disorders in musicians, and the cognitive processes of musical learning. A leading expert in his field, Dr. Altenmüller has published over 600 scientific papers and several books. He has received prestigious awards, including the Science Award of Lower Saxony, the Neuroscience of Music Award, and many more. He's a full member of Göttingen Academy of Sciences and Humanities. His work bridges medicine and music, helping musicians prevent and recover from performance-related disorders while deepening our understanding of how music shapes the brain. A very warm welcome to Dr. Eckart Altenmüller. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Karin. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you.
So let's dive right into the matter. Many of our listeners are just in the process of doing auditions. So how can we maintain access to the creative part of our brain during an audition and avoid slipping into that fight or flight mode?
Yeah, the most important part is that we try to detend, to relax. So the point is, the more we are focusing on a certain aim, the more we are so-called goal-directed, the less we have access to our creative part. So creativity is mostly the kind of free-floating thoughts which are in the right moment, at the right place, in the right performance mode. And so I think we have to do some exercises to prevent this over-focusing. So the most important part in musicians, as I have seen in my career, is that they are over-focusing and too intensely striving to be successful. And that's the point. So if you go into an audition, you should not be able to think about the goal. I want to have this position. I really want it. It's more, you should be interested in just displaying how you like the music, how you like the pieces, how you like the orchestra excerpts. And this is something which speaks for itself. And then creativity will come. Focus on the sound, focus on the piece, and focus on your ideas and imaginations you have in the moment. But prerequisite, of course, is to reduce general tension and to try to do some exercises beforehand, like yoga or like Alexander technique, to reduce the muscular tension.
So you already mentioned two different kinds of techniques, so to say, to prepare for an audition. Are there any other mental strategies that you would recommend for preparing an audition?
So the most important part is, of course, good preparation. You really should know the pieces. You really should be well prepared. You should be in good form. And that means also your instrument should be in excellent form. You should have no problems with the instrument, and it should be all fixed. So this is beforehand. So you have to prepare also bodily in terms of sleep enough beforehand, have maybe some exercises the day before, being in a good physical state, and also have a kind of rewarding experience before, maybe some nice breakfast or something like this. So, and the most important part is, of course, directly in the day of the audition, you should not be in a haste. You should just take the time. Take the time. Don't allow you to be in pressure because of traffic or because of other circumstances. So this would be an important part. And then beforehand, directly, I personally, I'm a big fan of progressive muscular relaxation according to Jacobson, because this is something which is easy to learn. It's easy to implement in your daily routines. And it's also something which helps you to get a kind of access to your body beforehand, just some maybe half an hour or an hour before you play. And I feel this is extremely useful. Another strategy which is also very important is, of course, mental strategies. Kind of, I usually also tend to go through the program mentally in a very quiet moment, maybe in the very moment, in the morning of the audition. And then I also recommend to strive to get some um, um, inner focus in terms of learning to guide the thoughts away from all the daily sorrows, from all the daily small things. Try to really focus on the pieces you are going to play and on the environment you are going to be in and on the kind of faces you are going to see. So something, anticipate what is going to happen. And this will allow you to be much more calm, to be much more relaxed in the moment. So I think it's a kind of the preparation, the mental preparation of an audition or any concert should include the whole setting. That means also the smell of the hall or the light on the stage or things like this. And you acquire this kind of strategy or this kind of knowledge by experience, of course. So if you have more auditions done, you know how it feels like and how it smells like and how the faces will be, things like this. But it's important that especially if you are a beginner in auditions, it's important that you prepare.
Yeah, so visualization and getting in the
Yes,
zone. Okay, important
right.
things. And when we read about neuroscience in general, we always come along this term neuroplasticity, mostly in the context of that it enables lifelong learning. But could you briefly explain to our listeners what it means and which role it plays for our daily practice?
Yes. So neuroplasticity means that our brain, the brain connections, the networks in the brains, the neurons, the synapses are changing after stimulation as a consequence of intense and goal-directed long stimulation. And one of the most richest stimuli is, of course, making music, because here you link audition, you link emotion, you link movements, you link planning, you link memory. Everything in the brain is linked more or less. And if you do this for a couple of hours a day, your brain will change. And this adaptation of the brain to this challenge of making professionally music, this is called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is extremely useful. It's something which is more or less it's subconscious. It has to do. We have more neuroplastic neuroplastic changes if we are less stressed. So the stress is something which inhibits neuroplasticity. And we know that the stress hormone cortisol is inhibiting the formation of new synapses, inhibiting the formation of new memories. So it's important, if you practice or if you do music, try to reduce stresses. There are always stresses, but try to reduce them. And then neuroplasticity also is different in different ages of your life. We have done a lot of studies in children. So if you start to play an instrument after the age of 7 years, brain cells, the neurons will adapt, they will become larger, centers in the brain will increase, they will be larger. It is visible even in a common MRI image. But if you are starting very early at age 4 until age 7, the neuroplasticity is not directly visible in the X-rays or in the MRI scans, because there the networks are optimized. They are small, but extremely efficient and extremely stable. And that is something we call metaplasticity. If you start very early with an instrument, and that may be any instrument, that means it can be recorder playing, it can be piano playing. If you start at age 4, your brain learns how to learn an instrument, how to link audition to movement. And this is something which then can generalize in later age. And that means if you have started at age 4, let's say with playing the violin, and you decide at age 8, oh, I prefer to go to the cello, you have access to this kind of patterns, and you will make rapid progress on the cello. And so plasticity depends on ages. We have also done a study showing that neuroplasticity induced by learning to play piano is also present in seniors. So if you are at age 70, you may really also, if you start to practice every day, maybe 20 minutes, we can see after 1 year changes in your brain.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's good.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. So maybe I start to play the cello by age 70. We will see. So does neuroplasticity also tell us something about how we can rewire our brains when we had, for example, a traumatic stage experience, maybe linked to one special orchestral excerpt or something that really went wrong? Can we change that then in our brains?
Yes, this it can change, but it depends. So the point is, if we have a very deep early trauma, maybe loss of a parent or something like this is something which stays somehow present, and it will have an influence on our later behavior, even as older adults. And that means we have a kind of less resilience to stressors. We have more anxieties. We are more prone to performance anxiety, for instance. So these are things, and you can change them, you can modify them, but you cannot wipe them out. That's a point.
Mm-hmm.
So this is our past. We carry our past with us, but that doesn't mean that we cannot be successful. We know that on the other time, early trauma, on the other side, early trauma may be a resource. It may be something which gives you playing and which gives your motivation some profoundness, depth, and depth.
Mm.
And that means that we can really maybe have access to deeper emotions and deeper meaning in what we are doing. So I would not say that early trauma per se is it's just part of our existence. It's part which can happen to any of us, and it will color our life. But the life will be somehow still very colorful and can be very fulfilled.
That's a great reframing, actually, of trauma and traumatic experiences. That it can be used even as a resource. So,
Yes.
wow, interesting. Let's maybe switch now, because I know that you're a flutist, so
Yeah.
that's a gift for us.
Yeah.
And I know that you're still active and practicing and playing concerts. So, did you ever experience this dual path of music and medicine as a compromise on both levels, or did one field rather enhance the other?
it's clear one field enhanced the other. It's not a compromise. In the contrary, it was cross-fertilization. And I already, when I was a very young student and I studied both at the same time, it made my brain really practicing an hour. I was full with energy to learn an hour. And then when I was learning an hour, going back to the flute and practicing. So this kind of switching between the two worlds of science and of arts was for me extremely fruitful. And I think it should something like this in most people. I think the point is that our brains are somehow, they are so rich and we have so many possibilities and so many potentials, and I think we could really use them, and they are somehow in a certain way. I mean, most musicians also have intense other interests, and they are interested in let's say in the history of music, or interested in composition, or interested in science in general. So I think this is it's just part of our whole universe, in our brain, in our personality. So I always found it extremely useful and it extremely helpful to do both. I have to say, on the other side, that at that time when I studied, and this was in the years 1978 to 82, 83, so it's more or less 45 years ago, studying was different from today. We were much less stressed. We were much less controlled. So just with my teacher, Aurel Nicolet, I had to go in the lessons and I loved it. Two hours per week with Nicolet, 1 hour with his assistant, that was Gülşen Tattoo at that time. And then I had also piano lessons, which I loved also. So one lesson. But all the other things, music theory, rhythm, rhythmic education, they were somehow they were not mandatory. I was not obliged to attend to the lessons. I had to write the exams, or I had to do the exams in ear training, etc. And this I could do, but I was very free in choosing where I wanted to be. And the same was in medicine. In medicine, we had no controls. We had, from time to time, every 2 years, we had a written test. That was it. And otherwise, we were free to do what we want. And this has changed a lot. And I think this is a problem for many students, because we call it in Germany, we call it the schooling of studies, Verschulung of studies. And this is something which is, in my opinion, it's a kind of expression of mistrust. We mistrust the motivation of the young people. We mistrust their focuses, and I think it should be reversed. It would be so much better if we would be more free to choose what we want to learn. And we know from pedagogy, we know from all science in learning, that self-motivated learning is by 10 times more efficient than any opposed learning kind of curriculum we have to fulfill.
So now you have even less opposed time frames, because you're shortly retired, and I hear that you're still actively practicing and doing all the work on the flute. So how do you maintain motivation and joy in it?
Yeah, I think it's just I just love the sound of the flute, and I loved it since I heard my first flute when I was 9 years old. I remember I saw this young boy playing a Pergolesi concerto, and I fell in love with the sound of this instrument. So this is one source of motivation, and the other one is indeed doing chamber music. Tonight I have a rehearsal with a quintetto. So we're playing Tafanel, woodwind quintet, which is beautiful. And and we also accept always concerts. I think for me, still playing in public is a very high motivation. And so I really try actively to seek for occasions to play in public. And because in public, you really have to be excellently prepared, and it's absolute unyielding. You have to be prepared. You have to have a beautiful sound. You have to be in time. You have to be everything. And so I think this is an important part of any instrumental playing for me. And I love it to play in public. I love it to give music as a kind of gift to people, and just this beautiful music of the flute.
Yeah, so great. So you
Yeah.
still push yourself into the situation to be at
Yeah.
your highest level. I find this fantastic. And do you also do some specific mental or physical exercises without your instrument to stay fit
Yeah.
for practicing?
Yeah, I do.
What
I
is
do a
it?
lot. I see. I'm about to 70 years, so I do a lot of sports. I was running this morning. I do a lot of also weight lifting a little bit. I do a lot for my back because flute playing is. I mean, it's very bodily in many kinds. I need very good lung volumes, so that's why I do endurance sports. I swim, and I like to move anyway. And then I do also with I do a lot of exercises with the flutes, which are mostly you can find a lot in this checkup by Peter Lukas Graf. This is in something it's very useful. For instance, I do as a routine, I do singing and playing at the same time to get control about my vocal folds. I do a lot of permanent respiration to get complete embouchure control and so on, complete control here. I do trumpet sound to improve our support. So I have I do harmonics. So I do a lot of basic things, but I always come also to the playing the pieces. So in the end, it's always the most important part is playing the pieces. And I really, I'm very interested in new pieces. I just discovered this beautiful piece for flute and piano by Shulamit Ran, which is called Birds of Paradise, which is wonderfully played, wonderfully composed for flute. And so I'm very curious about, and that's also, I usually go to my old university in Hanover, and we have Dina Björnskik Larsen, a wonderful flute player, and I listen to her classes and the literature they are playing.
Oh, so beautiful. We can hear the passion shine through
Yeah,
your
yeah,
words.
absolutely.
It's so great to see. You mentioned something interesting. You said you do a lot of endurance training for your lung capacity. So would you recommend if we have to play, for example, the Après-midi d'un faune,
Yeah.
to like do a lot of running before to be able to play the whole line in one breath? Does that help?
I think it's not in short term. It's not in short term, and I think it's something which has you have to build it up for a couple of years, 1-2 years, I think. But in general, I'm sure it's useful. But of course, there are also bodily. So for instance, one of my flute teachers and friends here in Hanover, that's Vukan Milin, he has a lung capacity of 8 liter. So that is really extremely. Yeah, he's very tall and a very tall person, and we measured it, and so I have only about 4.5 or 4.8 liter. So I think also for the après-midi d'un faune, I think the most important part is indeed the jet control, and so breathing technique and perfect jet control, that you have a very thin but very focused jet with the right thing, and then you can do it. I think it's with the modern instruments, it's not so difficult to make it in one breath. But if it's not working, you can also do some permanent breathing in between, and I think it's not a real problem.
No.
I have to say that in some way, I think that also breathing can be a kind of structuring element, which can be extremely musical and very useful. And so I don't believe that somebody with very small lungs and or a younger person has a problem because the breath is not long enough.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm very envious of 8 liters of lung volume. Wow.
Yeah, that's true. I
I
could
want that
imagine.
too.
Yeah, it's really. And Vukan is really playing like this. I mean, he's playing, and it's 30 seconds, and you think, hey, when will he breathe? And it's really something. Yeah.
Great. So, can you give our listeners maybe your top 3 do's and don'ts for practicing? Are there some
Yeah.
tips you could give us?
So the don'ts, I think it's very clear. Never practice if you are tired, if you get distracted, if you feel that you are not concentrating, if you don't listen to yourself, stop it. If you stop to listen to yourself, because this will not only not improve you, but it will deteriorate your playing because you are not paying attention. Second, stop practicing and make a break when you feel that you are tired in your embouchure. And this is because then flexibility of the lips will be less, and then the sound will become a little bit sharp. And this again, you will learn. That's the point. You learn what you do while you are tired, and this is something which is then it's then time consuming to or unlearn it again. And the third don't is, of course, stop practicing if you feel completely unmotivated, and also stop practicing if you feel pain. So this is something which is some people get shoulder pain, or and this is also a sign of a problem with technique if you have pain in your larynx. So you should stop there. What you do is, I think I personally believe very much in practicing in the morning because our hearing is better in the morning. And so we have done a study showing motor coordination, and motor coordination is best about 1 hour after waking up. So this is something. So motor coordination and hearing are the two things which are important for practicing. This is also the reason why many people believe that they are not as good in the morning as they are in the afternoon, because in the afternoon our hearing is tired and our pitch resolution, so the intonations, is more tolerant. And so this is, I mean, it's good for the audience in the evening. They were very tolerant with the thing, but for you, for practicing, it's much better to do it after, in the morning, or after a short afternoon nap. This is also very useful. So this is one do. So this means practice early. Second is sleep enough. I think the more you learn and the more you practice, it's very important that you have enough sleep, because all I practice is not directly connected in the brain with the synapses, but it's in a kind of buffer zone. And in the night sleep, or in the sleep in general, these synapses are going to be linked and they are going to be consolidated. So the memory builds up during sleep. And so it's very important. The more you learn, the more you should sleep. And so this is also an important part. Try to find a place where you have enough peace and tranquility to sleep well. And then the third thing for the do's, I always, but this is very, very, very personal. I was considered practicing as a kind of research. I'm very curious and I try out a lot of things. I also try out a lot of, I try out different editions of pieces and so on, even the Mozart concertos. I buy the new editions because I'm interested what the editor finds as a new aspect. So I always try, not only in terms of technical things, but also in terms of musical gestalt. I try to find out new things, and it's research. So for me, practicing is what people now name artistic research.
That's a beautiful term, and it links science and music again.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So, how long, you already mentioned, you should stop if you feel like pain, but is there like a general time limit on our practice time? How long is a healthy practice?
Yeah, that's a question which is very important. So my teacher always said, Nicolet was one, and then later Bennett. Nicolet said, you have to practice at least 4 hours a day, every day. I don't believe in this. The point is, what you have to learn is to perceive when you're practicing is no more productive, and then make a break and then switch. And this can be after 2 hours. this can be after 20 minutes. So this is something which students need to learn, that they believe in their own perception. And this means also feeling of fatigue, exhaustion, and realizing I'm not really listening to it. So it might be important to make a break already if you are practicing a really difficult piece from contemporary music, for instance. I think a break after 20 minutes may be extremely important to get the whole wiring. But if you are practicing something, let's say, which is less demanding, it may be you can practice much longer in a row. However, it may change every day. It depends on the hormones. It depends on the time you have, on the weather. It depends on the general bodily condition, and it depends on a lot of stresses we have in our society. So we should not underestimate the role of the society, our environment, on our practice ability. And if we have so many stressors as we have now in the moment due to the political reasons, I don't want to go into the details, but this has, in my opinion, an impact also on our general stress level, also when we are practicing.
Yeah, it's great to consider the bigger picture there. So pushing yourself is not good for the body, you would say, generally.
No.
Okay. And you also did a lot of research on all the imbalances that can occur when you push yourself too hard. Yeah. So dystonias and other things. Can excessive practicing lead to the focal dystonia diagnose? Is this one part of focal dystonia, this pushing yourself too hard?
Yes, it can be under certain circumstances. It can be a risk factor if you're pushing yourself too hard, and if you do not listen to your body. And so this is so we have done quite a lot of studies on practice behavior, and it's indeed you and one of my doctoral students, Eduardo Passorotto, who by the way is also a pianist, he could show that even a sudden increase in practice may be the risk factor which triggers the focal dystonia. So focal dystonia, it's a complex phenomenon because there's a gray zone. I think everybody knows these moments when you practice so much and then a trill is not working anymore, and then you get somehow a little bit crisp and firm, and then you try to force it and get it really fast and so on. This is what everybody knows somehow, and it's important that when this kind of consequences of pushing yourself too hard, which happens to everybody. This happened also to me. The consequences of pushing yourself too hard. If I start to try to break the wall, to force myself, and if I also emotionally I'm anxious and I'm somehow perfectionist, this combination of pushing yourself, anxiety, and perfectionism, this is a very dangerous combination. And so if I realize this, I should really try to find a solution and maybe think about my way how to practice. Generally, we have quite now a very clear picture of risk factors in focal dystonia. So first of all, which is very important also for all who are watching now this podcast, it's a very rare disorder. It's very rare, and it means that 99% of all professional musicians will not be suffering from focal dystonia. But the 1%, of course, everybody knows somebody who has focal dystonia, and it's so devastating for the life plans and for the emotional part of music for these people, that we all know about this kind of conditions. But it's important not to be really afraid. If you behave in a good way, if you have a good practice schedule, if you make sufficient pauses, if you're not pushing yourself too hard, if you try to be variable, if you adjust also your schedule according to your needs and to your body feelings, the risk is relatively low. Also, a lower risk is if you are lucky and you started to start very, very early. So we know that those musicians, and many of the excellent musicians, of course, start at age 4 and 5. These have a kind of resilience against focal dystonia. And this has to do with the metaplasticity, which I talked about, which means that our networks are somehow very stable and very resilient if we start very early. So this is one thing which is important. Another risk factor is um, we call it adverse childhood events. So if I had a very difficult childhood and I had an emotionally abusing experiences with my parents or with sisters, or bullying in the school or things like this, this might constitute certain risk factors. But we can adapt to this, and adaptation means the more I have risk factors in my past, the more I should be aware of my body when I'm practicing, and the more I should listen to my body and try to make breaks, try to avoid perfectionist attitudes, etc. Perfectionism is something which is very problematic in terms of, we have a so-called adaptive perfectionism. That's what I have. I try to perform well, and I try to avoid mistakes, and I try to have a nice sound. So that's okay. But it may be also in some persons, perfectionism gets kind of an attitude which is just being perfect for being perfect. And this can be extremely stressful. And this can then lead to dysfunctional behaviors, to overpractice, to anxieties also. And it's important that we already in our students, already in very early stages, try to avoid this kind of dysfunctional perfectionism. And this leads me then to our way how we deal with errors, or how we deal with false notes, or how we deal with failures. And this is something which is not really very well, I think, managed in our education system, especially when we prepare our young students for competitions like Jugend musiziert or Prima la Musica in Austria. It's very important also that we prepare them also for the more probable failure in some way. And so it's very important how to deal with this kind of things to avoid perfectionist attitudes. So focal dystonia, if I'm unlucky enough to develop a kind of loss of motor control, that's it in the essence. So I cannot control anymore my ring finger in the flute or something like this, and it's sticking to the key. We can now do a lot. We have developed a lot of excellent therapies, but I have to say all the therapies are somehow long-term. That means they need a couple of months, if not even more than a year, because it's focal dystonia, the kind of loss of motor control of highly refined, extremely complex movement patterns, is stored in our procedural memory in the brain. And this is a part very deep in the brain, in the middle of the brain, the so-called basal ganglia. And these basal ganglia are terribly conservative. If they have learned something, they want to keep it. They want to stay with it. And so we have to teach them, no, I want my ring finger lifts, or I want that my embouchure is flexible and that does this and that's, or that my tongue does this. But the basal ganglia say, no, I have learned it like this and I keep it. And so we have, in some way, we have to get extremely careful retraining. This is the most successful therapy, retraining of musicians' dystonia. And now we have a lot of retrainers. We have a lot of methods which are also very good. So there's body mapping, there's a retraining methods of instrumentalists. And so I always say the earlier we start with this kind, which is a holistic approach. It's not only just learning the fingerings, it's also general tension, breathing, tension also in embouchure, but also mental, dealing with the anxieties, dealing with the frustration, dealing with the anger about that I practice so much and it's not working. So retraining is a kind of bodily psychotherapy in some way, and we have now excellent experts who do this. I also have treated a lot of musicians with a so-called, I call it the quick fix. That's a kind of weakening of the dystonic muscle. So if the muscles are cramping like this, here in pianists, for instance, you can weaken them with a medication called botulinum toxin, and this weakens for about 3 to 6 months the muscles. So this cramping will not be anymore visible, and it allows in flute players, for instance, it allows a better control. I have to say the point is that I usually I try not to do it in first place. That's the first thing, because I believe that it's important that musicians witness their regain of control. They witness, okay, I can do it. So, and I tried not to do kind of external medication for this. And if I do an external medication like botulinum toxin, I say it's teaching your body new feelings. And you have to work with the botulinum toxin, and you have then to teach and to get the movements better. And this way, I be about 70 to 80% of those who are taking botulinum toxin. I can reduce the dosage and so one day after 2 or 3 years, I can stop it.
So you're talking a lot now about the link of our mental states to the physical problems that can occur, and also about traumatic childhood experiences and how they affect the body. So what would you say, in your experience, what percentage of neurological conditions you have treated over the years have a psychosomatic background?
That's a very good question. I believe that we should forget about psychosomatic. It's psychosomatic. I think it's all psychosomatic, and we cannot this kind of separation of psychological conditions and bodily conditions. I think this is an artifact, maybe, which is in traditions of Descartes and of the philosophers of the 17th century or 18th century. But I think, first of all, any condition I have with my body has an impact on my psyche. So if you have, let's say, cancer, it will produce a lot of anxiety. It will produce a lot of doubts. It will question everything I've done. If you have a kind of inflammatory bowel disease or morbus Crohn or something like this, this has a huge impact on your self-confidence. It has an impact about your day is no more plannable. All these kind of things. So any condition has an enormous psychological impact. And I have to say, unfortunately, many of the doctors don't consider this. Even if I have arterial hypertension, okay, if I don't take this pill, I'm at risk to develop a stroke. Come on, this is a daily. I mean, I'm not telling it to myself every day 10 times, but it's in the underlying presence here, and it changes my mental state. So I would say that any disorder has a psychological impact, but also any disorder has also a psychological cause and one of the conditions. For instance, we know it very well in hypertension. So hypertension is also a kind of consequence of chronic stress. Very simple. It's a kind of people who are stressed all the time. And then, like in the orchestra, French hornists. The French hornists we call it the so-called hornist hypertension, because they are really very much stressed. And of course, it's stressful because the control of the instrument is so subtle. It's so audible, whatever you do as a hornist. So this, you see here very nicely that the psychosomatic part of arterial hypertension, which is clearly a bodily condition, is extremely strong.
And do you have the feeling that those imbalances like dystonias and other imbalances are becoming more and more due to more pressure in the orchestra? Is there a trend you see?
Yeah, again, a very good question. I have to say that we have done a study in Germany, the prevalence of focal dystonia, of new focal dystonia since 1994 for 30 years is, I'm going to write it down as a manuscript. So the peak of incidence or prevalence of focal dystonia was in about 2014, 2015. And then it's reducing. And this, I think, has to do with better training, with better formation, with more knowledge of the professors, more knowledge of the teachers. And I think in generally musicians behave much better in the last 10 years than they behaved when I started this kind of musicians medicine in 1994. So, for instance, if you look now in the orchestras, most of them do sports. Most of them do not smoke. Very little. I mean, for instance, smoking. My teacher, Nicolai, smoked chain, and we all smoked at that time. And this is, today it is absolute unthinkable, and the same with alcohol consumption and so on. So the behavior of musicians and the knowledge about problems is much better. And so I think in generally the care, the self-care of musicians has improved. However, the working conditions, they have not improved. They're still working on improving the working conditions, but it must be very clear that, for instance, Corona and also the shortening of the funding of orchestras and cultural institutions in general has put a lot of pressure on musicians. And I have seen this during the Corona pandemic. Many of my students came, but does it make sense that I do music? I mean, no, but it's not relevant for the system. Es ist nicht systemrelevant. That was a German saying, and it was such a blow and such a kind of I would say Missachtung of arts and musicians, which I found it outrageous. I found it terrible how the society reacted. And these stresses, I think, are increasing. And now we have the political stresses, and we have all these parties, and also which are very critical about funding of opera houses, and this kind of things. And so I'm afraid that the stresses are increasing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the stressors are increasing. And do you see a similar trend with medicine against stress? So with beta blockers, enhancers, or any nerve calming substances?
We have done a good work in the last 10 years. So the prescription of beta blockers for performance anxiety is reduced very much. I have to say, I prescribed it very frequently in the 90s and in the early 2000s, but this has been reduced because we have so much better coaching. We have so much better also training at the music schools about audition training and so on. This is now improved. But in general, I think in medicine, of course, we have an increase of the so-called societal diseases, obesity, diabetes, arterial hypertension, and this is something which has. This is a very complex connection between society and underprivileged communities and feeding behavior, industrial interests. This is very complex, but I have to say I'm really a little bit sad about how little politicians really take reason and see the causes of this kind of disorders in the societal environment.
Yeah, that just seems to not be so important at the moment.
No.
For finishing this wonderful conversation, we have some questions from our community members, and we have one community member who has a special problem. Yeah. Why do some musicians experience sudden physical tension like neck stiffness right before playing? And what strategies can help release it quickly? It's just when she's on stage, actually. So she experiences this kind of freezing in her neck.
Yeah. So this is something which is not uncommon. It's anxiety. It's simply anxiety. It's a reflex. It's a reflex-like reaction on anxiety, and the neck, to make the neck stiff, is very important because beforehand, this was one of the most vulnerable parts of our body when we were when a predator, a lion or a wolf, was coming, and so in anxieties, the neck stiffness is extremely common. And so we have to address this holistically. So again, about preparation, progressive muscle relaxation, yoga things, mental strategies, support of self-confidence, a lot of practice rehearsals, practice concerts to get used to the situation. And in the moment, when I feel I get this freezing, respiration. So deep respiration, which is important that you try to feel the feet, try to feel the contact to the ground. This might reduce a lot of this kind of neck tension. It's just a reflex. But it's true that neck tension is for a flute player is extremely annoying because, of course, it also has a direct consequence for the larynx and so on.
Yeah. And another community member asked, how can musicians retrain their minds to break the cycle of pain that seems to be linked more to performance pressure and physical injury? Because she went to a doctor and she was in a lot of pain, but nothing could be found. So, what could she do about that?
This is something which is most common. This problem in performing arts medicine is so-called chronic pain, which is linked to the instrument and which is linked to the sound of the instrument. And this is there are three important measures. The first is generally try to work on the stress level and try not to develop anxiety beforehand of the pain. The second point is try to systematically increase playing time and without pain. So this can start with 2 minutes. So very common pain is epicondylitis. Very common pain is back pain. Very common pain in flute players is also shoulder pain. And try to play 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Take new repertoire. That means music which is not yet linked with pain, and play, but only very short time, and try to stay pain-free in this episodes, and then systematically increase the time. And then the third point, which is also sometimes very useful, is try to elevate the pain thresholds. And there are three possibilities to elevate the pain threshold. One is endurance sports. So we know this is very important. The second one is indeed psychological support with also with antidepressants. So the antidepressant amitriptyline, that's the name of a pill, can be very useful in in heightening the pain threshold, so that you, and it's not addictive, it's not dangerous, it has no major side effects, and it can be very useful to overcome this kind of chronic pain. Chronic pain always has to be taken serious, and if I cannot get rid of the pain, I think it should be also good to see a psychotherapist to discuss the consequences of the pain for my life, because it can be really debilitating in some ways.
Wow, yeah, that's a big one. And our very last question is actually also a big one. What are your expectations and hopes for the new generation of musicians? What do you see as their biggest challenges and how can they best overcome them?
Okay, so I have a lot of hopes for the new generation. So they have a huge access to literature. They can play wonderful. We have a huge, a whole. It's in my opinion, it's a paradise what we have in kind of materials to play, what we all, and the repertoire is so rich now. So this is the first thing. The second thing is the new musicians also have the chance to have better. I think. The teacher, the level of the teaching has improved a lot. And this is also very, very good. So I see also that, I mean, what I played in my final exam is nowadays, that was Band Alois Zimmermann, then it was Malnois and Born Fantasy, Carmen Fantasy. These are nowadays the pieces which are at admittance at the university. They play. So this was what I played in 1985 in my final exam. Is nowadays the young. So the level has improved enormously, and this has to do, I think, first of all, with better training, with more knowledge in the training, and it has also to do with better instruments. Also, this must be very clear, and it has also to do with a culture which is so rich, and the access. I mean, when I was a flute player, I know I was really very enthusiastic. But at age 15 in 1970, get a record of Messiaen. There was none. I mean, Messiaen Le Melnois, that was had appeared 15 years before. There were the music, but I could not access a record. There was one then later with Christian Lardet, one of my teachers, who appeared, I think, in 71 or 72. But nowadays, the young have these wonderful richness of resources. So this is the good thing. So the challenges, I think it must be very clear. Competition is high, and it has increased. That is very clear. So we must be very stable to survive competition. That means I have to work on my confidence. I have to see, when I practice, I have to see what is good, what I'm doing. Not only what is not so good, but also what is good. That is very important. Then we must be very flexible. I advise to all the young flute players, and that's the part I know well, do contemporary music, try to learn the new techniques, do the classical thing, play the Mozart concertos, and if you have spare time also, do traverso. Take some lessons, maybe 4 years of traverso, to get an idea how to play the Baroque music and so on. It's very useful. So I think they must be very flexible. And also nowadays, I think it's not only playing well. It's not the thing which is only important, but also relate to other people. Persuade them. About about your inner world of music, and also be nice, be kind, be höflich, be
Polite.
so, yeah, be polite. These kind of things. I think it's very important also that we train our students in the music school, especially in kind of behavior and social behavior, because this is important. Listen to other people.
Oh, that's such a beautiful message for the ending of our conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Altenmüller. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah.
What a treasure. What a gift to our audience. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Karin, for asking me. And it was a great pleasure. And your questions were great. And the questions of the audience, very interesting. Thank you.